All right, so today we're gonna dive into a world that a lot of folks don't really see, the behind the scenes stuff, and that's event coordination.
Yeah.
We've all been to events and stuff, but we're looking at some interview questions for people who want to get into the field, and it's kind of cool, right? Because it's like, wow, yeah, all this stuff has to happen
Yeah, when you think about it.
for any event to come off,
Right.
you know?
It is pretty amazing
Yeah.
how much goes into it.
So that's our mission today, is to try to unpack this and see what it takes.
Right.
What it takes to really pull off these events, whether they're, small little private things or, big, huge public spectacles.
And everything in between.
Yeah.
From, birthday parties to corporate galas
Yeah.
to, sporting events.
Yeah, exactly. And you think about it, the event coordinator is the central figure
They are.
that's making sure that all this stuff comes together.
Pulling all the strings.
Right. It's not just the logistics. We're talking about managing budgets sometimes, very
Very big budgets.
huge budgets, right? And liaising with clients and making sure that their vision is realized
Absolutely.
through all these different vendors and stuff, like caterers, AV people, decorations, security.
Yeah, you name it.
Yeah, all that stuff, right? And
Yeah.
then they have to have marketing skills.
Right.
You know,
And some basic
IT skills
to manage all the different platforms.
Yeah, and websites and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and one of the things that kind of blows my mind is that a lot of these people are working on multiple events at the same time.
Absolutely.
So that's already a huge challenge right there.
It's a lot of plates spinning at the same time.
So yeah, so let's get into this. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat is that
Like in the questions?
yeah, in the questions it's experience is really, really valued.
Your int is key.
Yeah, they want people who've done this before,
Right.
It's not just oh, I'm enthusiastic.
Right, especially at the higher levels,
Yeah.
and especially, larger corporations or bigger organizations. They really are looking for people who've
Yeah, attractive.
done it before.
Yeah, and often a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, in public relations or hospitality.
Right, exactly.
That seems to be the starting point.
Yeah.
And then one of the things I thought was kind of interesting was that they really value local knowledge.
Absolutely.
Knowing
Filters.
the vendors and the venues
Yeah.
in a certain area.
Yeah.
I guess that gives you a real edge.
That makes a lot of sense because
Yeah.
you've got those relationships already built.
Exactly.
You know who to call.
Exactly.
You know what's available.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. And so and then the salary, I mean, we're looking at 97 to 126K.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 97 to 126,000 with a median of about 167.
So we're talking about some serious,
Serious money.
serious money. Yeah. So it's
It's a profession with a lot of responsibility.
it's not just, fluffing up the balloons.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
There's a lot more to it.
Exactly.
So let's dive into the first question that we pulled out of here.
Okay.
And this is one that kind of tries to get to what the person is really interested in, what they're, kind of what drives them.
Yeah, what motivates them?
What motivates them exactly. So the question is, what types of events do you prefer to work on or find exciting to plan?
Good question.
Right. And the example answer that we have here is pretty interesting. It focuses on,
Internal company events.
yeah, internal company events, employee recognition programs.
Celebrating milestones.
Yeah. Team building exercises.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think that's a really interesting take because,
Yeah.
a lot of people, when they think about event planning, they think about
The big stuff?
the big splashy.
Yeah, weddings and stuff.
Yeah, public events, weddings,
Yeah.
concerts.
Yeah.
But there's a whole world of corporate events
Yeah.
that are really important for companies and organizations.
Yeah. What it made me think of is it's not all about the big wow factor for everybody.
Right. It's about the people.
Yeah.
And it's about creating a positive experience
Yeah.
for those people.
Yeah.
Whether it's, a small team building event or a big company-wide celebration.
And it's interesting too because I think it speaks to there's different types of rewards in this field.
Absolutely.
Some people are really driven by,
The creativity,
yeah.
the excitement of putting on a big show.
Yeah.
But other people are really drawn to the
The more intimate.
smaller scale,
Yeah.
the more personal connections.
Yeah. And I think, you hit on something important there that these event coordinators have to really understand people.
Yeah, human dynamics are a big part of it.
Yeah. It's not just logistics and spreadsheets.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how people interact
Yeah.
and how to create an environment where they can thrive and enjoy themselves.
And do you think that maybe some people even specialize early on?
I think that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some people might find their niche
Yeah.
and really focus on developing their skills in a specific area.
Yeah, like corporate events versus weddings or, big
Just-
festivals or something like that.
Some people might love the energy of a big music festival.
Yeah.
Others might prefer the intimacy of a small private dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that. That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question here really gets to like the core of what makes someone successful in this field. Okay, and it's can you describe the personality traits, talents, and experience event planners should have?
Big question.
Yeah, big question, right?
Yeah.
So what they're really looking for here is like,
The whole package.
yeah.
Not just the hard skills, but also the soft skills.
Exactly, yeah.
The personality traits.
Yeah, the things that make you
They make you good at this.
good at this kind of demanding job, right?
Right.
And the answer that we have here highlights some really, really vital qualities.
Absolutely.
One of them is imagination.
Imagination is key.
Yeah, you got to be able to,
To envision things.
come up with,
To think outside the box.
creative solutions to problems.
Absolutely.
And to bring those visions to life.
Oh, absolutely.
Because,
But also you got to be flexible.
oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because things never go according to plan.
Things never go according to plan.
Ever.
Yeah. So you got to be able to,
To adapt.
roll with the punches and come up with solutions.
Right on the fly. On the fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, collaboration is also super, super important
Oh, huge.
because you're working with so many different people,
So many people.
clients, vendors, venue managers,
Caterers.
caterers, florists,
Photographers. Yeah.
photographers.
Videographers. Yeah. It's like,
It's a whole ecosystem.
yeah, you got to be able to like work with all these different personalities.
And get everybody on the same page.
Yeah. And that's where communication comes in.
Right.
Right.
Strong communication skills are essential.
You got to be able to articulate your ideas clearly,
Absolutely.
listen effectively,
Right.
and, manage expectations
On all sides.
on all sides.
And understand the client's needs.
Yeah. Really do what they want.
That's crucial.
Yeah.
You have to be able to listen to what they're saying.
Yeah.
And sometimes even what they're not saying.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
really understand what they're envisioning for their event. Yeah. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is that, this idea of cultivating long-term relationships with vendors and venue managers.
Oh, that's so important.
Yeah, it's like,
Their relationships are gold.
yeah, it's like you're building a network
Absolutely.
of trusted partners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you need something at the last minute,
Yep.
or if you're looking for a creative solution,
Yeah.
you need to be able to call on those people.
Yeah, and they'll be there for you.
Right. Exactly.
All right, so let's move on to some more like practical stuff here.
Okay.
Okay, so this question really dives into like the preparation phase.
All right.
Okay, so the question is, how do you prepare for a kickoff meeting with event stakeholders?
Good question.
Right. And so stakeholders are basically,
Anybody who has a vested interest in the event?
yeah, anybody who's involved in this thing,
That's right.
client sponsors, key team members, all those folks.
Exactly.
So it's like, how do you get ready for that first meeting where you're trying to turn a vision into reality?
Right.
And the example answer here is pretty methodical.
Yeah.
It's very step by step, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So the first thing is research.
Research.
You've got to do your homework.
Know the organization.
Yeah, understand the organization, look at past events.
Right. Look at what they've done before.
Yeah, see what worked, what didn't work,
Exactly.
And then reaching out to potential vendors and the venue manager.
Right. Get some preliminary information.
Yeah.
Get a sense of what's possible.
Yeah, what's available.
What the cost might be.
Yeah, what the limitations are.
Exactly.
And then make sure that all the relevant client stakeholders are in that initial meeting.
That's key
That's huge.
to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, prevent misunderstandings down the line.
Absolutely.
So that's a great first step.
Yeah, that's a solid foundation.
So then, after that initial meeting, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, how do you stay prepared?
Yeah. How do you keep it all together
Yeah, how do you keep it all together?
for the next event?
Right, because you might be juggling multiple events.
Absolutely.
And so the question is, what do you do to stay prepared and organized for your next event?
Love it.
And the example answer here talks about a couple of key strategies.
Yeah.
Schedule management.
That's huge.
It's huge. Yeah.
Keeping track of all the deadlines,
Yeah.
all the tasks, all the moving parts.
Yeah, you got to be super organized.
Absolutely.
And then building a portfolio of creative ideas and reliable resources.
That's a great idea.
It's like a swipe file.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like I've used this caterer before. They were great.
Right. This venue worked really well for this type of event.
Yeah.
This photographer is amazing.
Exactly.
Keep track of all those things.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Right.
And then maintaining regular communication with suppliers and vendors.
That's ongoing.
Yeah.
You can't just reach out to them once at the beginning. You have to stay in touch.
Yeah, you got to nurture those relationships.
Absolutely.
Well
Keep
done.
those lines of communication open.
Yeah, and one of the things that they highlighted here in this example answer is this idea of, they were able to plan an event in under 5 days
Wow.
because they were so prepared.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they had all their ducks in a row.
Yeah, they had their resources, they had their relationships.
Exactly.
They were ready to go
And
for
so
you.
that's a great example of how that kind of proactive
Operation,
can really pay off.
big time.
Yeah,
Especially when you're under a time crunch.
exactly.
Sometimes things come up
Yeah.
and you have to be able to pivot quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And having those resources and those relationships in place
Yeah.
can make all the difference.
It's like having a well-stocked pantry.
Exactly.
Yep.
You can whip up a meal in no time.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about client relations,
Okay.
which is a huge part of this job.
And this question is, how do you manage a nervous client who is concerned about their event going smoothly?
Well, that's a good one.
Right, because I think a lot of us can relate to this.
Yeah.
We've all had clients who are
A little bit anxious
a little bit anxious. Yeah.
about things,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to something as important as their event.
Yeah, and so the example answer here really emphasizes communication.
Communication is key.
Yeah, you got to keep those lines of communication open,
Oh,
and
okay.
you got to be transparent.
Transparent.
Yeah.
Let them know what's going on,
Yeah, give them regular updates.
even when things are going well.
Yeah, even when things are going well,
Right.
because that builds confidence. Like,
Absolutely.
hey, I'm on top of this.
I'm taking care of everything.
You don't have to worry.
You can relax,
And then if there are any hiccups,
right? Address them immediately.
yeah,
Don't try to hide them.
don't sweep them under the rug.
Don't wait till the last minute.
Yeah, because that just makes it worse, right?
Be upfront about it
Be upfront.
and have a solution ready.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too, is that, it's not just about like, oh, here's the problem. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, here's the problem and here's what we're going to do about it.
Here's how we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
Or here's some options.
Yeah.
Give them a sense of control.
And it shows that you're proactive.
Absolutely.
You're not just like, oh, well,
right.
too bad.
It's like, I've got this.
Yeah, I've got this.
I'm on top of it.
So
So-
it builds trust.
It builds trust. Exactly.
when you're transparent and you're proactive.
Okay. So even with the best laid plans,
Right.
sometimes things go wrong.
Things happen.
Things happen, right?
Unexpected things.
Yeah. So the question is, what general steps do you take when something at your event doesn't go according to plan?
Okay.
So it's like the curveball question,
Right. The what if question.
the what if question. Yeah. And the example answer here is very practical.
Yeah.
It's like a step-by-step process.
The first thing is identify the problem.
Figure out what went wrong.
Yeah. What's the root cause of
Yeah.
this issue?
Exactly.
And then communicate.
Communicate
Yeah.
with everybody.
With all the stakeholders.
So the client, the vendors, the venue staff.
Yeah.
Make sure everybody knows what's going on.
Transparency is key here,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Because if you try to hide something,
It's going to backfire.
it's going to backfire. Yeah.
It always does.
It always does. And then collaborate to find solutions.
Right. Work together
Yeah.
to figure out how to fix it
Yeah.
or how to mitigate the damage.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, too,
Yeah.
is that, it's not about pointing fingers.
Right.
It's not about blaming anybody.
It's about solving the problem
It's about solving the problem.
as a team.
As a team, exactly.
Moving forward.
Yeah. And that's where that experience comes in.
Absolutely.
Right.
Having that
You've
experience,
seen this before.
you've been there, done that.
You know how to handle it. Right.
Okay, so let's talk about success.
Okay.
How do you know if an event has been successful?
Right. How do you measure that?
Yeah, so the question is, in your opinion, what contributes to the success of an event, and how do you measure how successful an event was?
Good question.
Right. And the example answer here ties success back to that initial client meeting,
Right.
setting clear objectives from the outset
Absolutely.
and having a detailed plan.
Right.
Rainy
if
odds.
you've planned well,
Yeah.
you're more likely to succeed.
Yeah.
It's not a guarantee, but it definitely increases your chances.
And then the measures of success are really interesting.
Yeah,
Positive feedback from the client.
it's always good.
That's always good, right?
Yeah.
But even more telling are referrals.
Referrals are huge.
Referrals are huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that means that the client was so happy.
They're willing to put their reputation on the line
Yeah.
and recommend you to other people.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
That's a really big deal. Yeah.
So to illustrate this,
The interviewer might ask you to describe the most successful event you planned.
okay, yeah. And the example that we have here is a national sales meeting for a technology company.
Okay.
So what do you think made this particular event a success story?
Well, I think there were several factors.
Yeah.
One was that they had ample lead time,
Okay.
which is a luxury in event planning.
Okay.
You know, a lot of times you're working with very tight deadlines.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in this case, they had plenty of time to plan,
Yeah.
which allowed them to really think things through
Yeah.
and make sure that everything was covered.
Yeah.
They also had a sufficient budget,
Okay.
which is obviously important.
Yeah.
You know, you can't create a great event without the resources to do so.
You got to have the money to make it happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they had clear client expectations,
Okay.
which is also crucial.
Yeah. You got to know what the client wants.
You got to know what they're envisioning,
Yeah.
what their goals are.
Yeah. And then you got to have a good team. You got to have good vendors.
Experienced vendors,
Experienced vendors.
top-tier vendors,
Top tier vendors.
and a knowledgeable site manager.
Yeah. So those relationships that we talked about before really paid off
Big time.
in this case. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the ultimate validation of this event's success is that the client immediately committed to holding the same event the following year.
Wow, that's a great sign.
Yeah, that says it all right.
Yeah, that speaks volumes.
Yeah, they were so happy.
They were thrilled.
They were thrilled, yeah. And so
That's the goal.
that's the goal.
To create an event that's so successful
Yeah,
that the client wants to do it again,
yeah.
year after year.
Year after year, exactly. All right, so
Good stuff.
good stuff. Okay, so now let's talk about budget management,
Okay.
which is like a cornerstone of event planning.
Absolutely.
You got to be able to manage the money.
Sorry.
You got to be able to keep track of the expenses.
You got to be fiscally responsible.
Yes.
Fiscally responsible.
Exactly. So the question is, what would you do if you noticed an event you were working on was going over budget?
Uh-oh.
Oh, right.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. So what do you do?
Well, the first thing is to try to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Right.
So, setting realistic expectations up front,
Yeah.
making sure that the client's vision aligns with their budget.
Yeah. Making sure that they're not trying to do too much.
Right. Or that they understand the costs involved.
Yeah. And then tracking expenses diligently.
Meticulously.
Meticulously. Yeah.
Keeping track of every penny.
Yeah.
A lot of event planners use software to help them with this.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of great programs out
Oh,
there
no.
that can help you stay on top of your budget.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes things happen.
Yeah.
Unexpected costs come up.
Yeah.
Maybe the caterer raises their prices.
Yeah.
Or maybe you need to add some last-minute rentals.
Yeah.
So it's important to have a contingency fund.
Okay.
Set aside some money
Yeah.
for those unexpected expenses.
So like a percentage of the overall budget.
Exactly.
Okay.
10 to 15% is a good rule of thumb.
Okay.
So that if something comes up,
Yeah.
you've got a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, you're not like scrambling
Right.
to come up with the money.
Exactly.
And then if you do start to go over budget,
Right.
you got to communicate with the client.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be transparent.
Be transparent. Yeah.
Let them know what's going on and
Yeah.
explore options with them.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some areas where you can cut costs.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're willing to increase the budget.
Yeah.
It's a conversation.
Yeah, you got to work together.
You got to work together to find a solution.
Yeah. And that's a tough conversation to have.
It can be.
But it's better to have it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
Right.
Don't wait till the end
Don't wait till the end.
when it's too late
Yeah, when it's too late.
to do anything about it.
Okay, so finally,
Right.
let's talk about venue selection,
Okay.
which is obviously a huge part of event planning.
Yeah.
You got to have a place to hold the event.
You got to have space.
You got to have a space, right?
Right.
So the question is, what criteria do you evaluate when choosing an event venue?
Good question.
And the example answer here starts by saying, prioritize the client's needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the venue has to align with their vision.
Right.
It's their event.
It's their event.
So it has to reflect their style,
Yeah, their taste, their budget,
their brand.
the brand.
Yeah.
All of that.
All of that.
And then, leverage your experience.
Right.
Use your local knowledge
Absolutely.
of available venues.
Yeah.
If you've done similar events before,
Right.
You probably have some ideas of venues that would work well.
Yeah.
And then if you're looking at a venue that you're not familiar with,
Right.
you got to do your research.
Do your homework. Yeah. Contact the site manager.
Ask a lot of questions.
Ask a lot of questions. Yeah.
What's the capacity?
Yeah.
What services are available?
Yeah.
What resources do they have?
Yeah.
What's the layout like?
Yeah. Is there enough parking?
Is there enough power?
Yeah.
All those logistical things.
Yeah. And, one thing that I'm curious about is, like, are there certain types of contracts
Oh, yeah.
that event planners should be particularly mindful of?
Absolutely.
Like when you're working with caterers or AV companies,
Yeah.
are there certain things that you really got to watch out for?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So with caterers, for example,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that the contract clearly specifies the guest count,
Okay.
the menu,
Yeah.
any dietary restrictions,
Yeah.
and the service level.
Okay.
Are they doing buffet style?
Yeah.
Are they doing plated dinners?
Yeah.
Are they doing past hors d'oeuvre?
Yep.
All those details need to be spelled out.
Okay. Yeah.
And then with AV companies,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you understand the scope of their equipment,
Okay.
what they're providing,
Yeah.
the setup and tear down times,
Okay.
and any potential hidden fees.
Oh, yeah. Hidden fees. That's always a good one.
Sometimes they'll charge extra for things like
Yeah.
delivery or setup
Yeah.
or overtime.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that all those costs are clearly outlined in the contract.
Okay. And then cancellation clauses are also important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what happens if the event has to be canceled?
Yeah.
Who's responsible for the costs?
Oh.
All those details need to be spelled out.
And liability insurance.
Liability insurance is essential.
Yeah.
In case something goes wrong,
Yeah.
somebody gets hurt,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're covered.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, contracts are a big deal
Contracts are a big deal.
in event planning.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap this up here, we've gone through a lot of these interview questions. And I think it's really clear that this is a profession that demands a lot.
It does.
It's not just about logistics.
It's so much more than that.
It's so much more than that. It's creative vision.
Right.
It's meticulous organization.
It's people skills.
It's people skills, yeah. and
Communication.
communication.
Problem solving.
Problem solving, yeah. And it's really interesting to see how these interview questions
Yeah.
really highlight the skills and the things that you need to be successful in this field.
They really do.
And I think one of the things that I've really taken away from this is that these event planners are really the unsung heroes.
They are.
And-
They're the people behind the scenes,
Yeah.
making sure that everything runs smoothly
Yeah.
so that everybody else can enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
And they rarely get the credit they deserve.
They rarely get the credit they deserve. Yeah. And so,
So let's give them a round of applause.
yeah, round of applause to all the event planners out there.
Yeah.
You guys are awesome.
You make the world a more fun and exciting place.
Yeah. So for you listening, we've gone through all this stuff.
Yeah.
We've seen how much detail and coordination goes into planning an event.
Right. Host, speaker,